Welcome to this edition of Lexington Remembers. My name is Dan Fenn, and it's my real pleasure and delight to welcome to our program one of Lexington's real jewels, Regie Gibson, familiar to many of you. And we're going to talk together about how he came to Lexington and what he does and what life is like in his line of work, and any particular memories that he has as to thoughts he has to how Lexington's changed since he arrived here. So you haven't always lived in Lexington.
I have not. When I first moved here to Massachusetts from Chicago, in the winter of 2000, I moved to Belmont. That's where my wife lived, in Belmont. And we moved to Lexington about 10 to 11 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
So are you feeling a part of the community, or do people? Yeah.
I am. I'm feeling very much a part of the community. People ask me to do things which are community-based. I hardly ever say no to that. I'm a member. I have a spiritual community that I found here, church community in Lexington, and I'm involved with that, as well as my wife, Katie O'Hare Gibson. She's involved with that. I'm also involved with Boy Scouts. I do stuff with them, and also with the William Diamond Jr. Drum and Fife Corps. I have my sons are also part of that. So yeah, it's a lot of things in Lexington. I'm quite a townie, I guess.
Yeah. Now, you were born and bred in Chicago?
I was born in Mississippi, and I was raised in Chicago.
Okay. Yeah. And how did, it's kind of a ways from Chicago.
Well, which part, Mississippi or Massachusetts?
Well, both, but I was thinking of Lexington.
Oh, Lexington is a ways, yeah. In many ways, it's a long way from Chicago, at least from the Chicago that I grew up in. I fit in, I think, and it seems to fit in me.
But how did you happen to come here?
What was it, 1999, I think? I came here to do a performance, poetry, at one of Harvard's, Longfellow Hall is where it was.
Oh, yeah.
And the woman who would eventually cast her lot with me, she just happened to be there, and we talked to each other, and she came out to something else I was doing while I was here over those 3 days, and we spent time together. And from that point on, before I left to go back to Chicago, we decided that we wanted to make this a thing. And thankfully, because of two things that were in abundance at the time, which was Southwest in an abundance of cheap flights coming into Providence, and they also would allow one to change the date that you want to fly back. And then there was also, that allowed me to stay longer because of the way my job was, the way I make a living, is that I could have 2 or 3 weeks between engagements. And the other thing that made it easy was this burgeoning thing just beginning at the time called the internet. And because of the internet, also accompanying that with cheap phone calls and cheap flights, it made an otherwise impossible relationship happen.
Workable. Yeah.
Very workable, absolutely.
Yeah. And Katie is a Lexington. She
Yes.
grew up here.
Yeah, she grew up here, right here in Lexington.
Right.
She did. As a matter of fact, we're in the home that she grew up in.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay. She's assistant principal at Estabrook.
She is assistant principal at Estabrook.
Yeah.
Yes.
She's very scary. Assistant principals are always scary.
They were always the disciplinarians.
Yeah.
When I came up. She's somewhat less scary at home. Somewhat less, but yeah, that's her role. But she's not the sort of Teutonic, principal that I grew up with.
Right.
Back in the days when you could beat children.
Yeah.
But she's much more about conflict resolution and getting parties together to talk about what was the thing that initiated this. How can we go about avoiding it?
Yeah.
She's much more about trying to find the differences and quelling them in a way rather than lending toward punishment.
Now, was she a teacher when you met her?
Yes, actually, she was teaching preschool when we first met. And then shortly after that, she started teaching at a place called Neighborhood House in Dorchester. And she taught there for several years. And then a position opened up in Lexington at Estabrook. And she went for that. She got that position. And so she taught in the classroom for 9 years here in Lexington. But she's been teaching previous to that.
Yeah.
But she taught about 9 years in the classroom in Lexington. And then she became assistant principal just last year.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And is she enjoying it? I imagine she is.
Oh, yeah, she does it. She does enjoy it. I have gotten very good at back rubs and foot rubs and foot massages because it's not an easy job.
Yes.
You imagine being a parent having to deal with one child. You imagine having to deal with hundreds.
Yeah, right.
And then having also deal with the staff. And that position, as I'm coming to see it, is more political than I would have thought it would be. Having to navigate what parents want, having to navigate what the superintendent wants, having to navigate what the school committee needs, having to navigate what each child needs, having to deal with Metco, having to deal with this. There's a lot of smoothing over and political stuff that has to get done. Not political in the bad way, but political in the sense of what's possible to do given the confines of what's available.
Yeah.
And she seems to be rather adept at navigating those.
Well, I have served on a committee or two with her. And
yes, right, you have.
Yeah. So tell me what you have a couple of kids that I see around.
Yes, we do. Jordan, who's 15 years of age, and McKenna, who is 10 years of age. And they are really, most days, a very beautiful pair. There are some days when they can test one's limits.
Yes,
but that's the way it goes. I know I'm not telling any parent out there anything they don't already know.
and they're pretty active in town too.
They are. They play music. My son Jordan, he's in a couple of music projects at LHS. He also plays with William Diamond Jr., drum and fife corps. And he's also does a lot of stuff with Scouts. He was SPL, now he's just a regular Scout. But he does a lot of stuff with Scouts. He's very involved. And McKenna is also, he plays with All Town Band. He's doing that stuff. He's also doing William Diamond Jr., drum and fife corps. And he's also in Scouts now in the same troop, Troop 10, which his brother was in. McKenna also sings at the church. He also does a lot of stuff with the Lexington youth players, so he does a lot of the musicals that have to do that is put on by that. So yeah, they're pretty active in a lot of different things. Yeah,
that's great. Now, you said you lived in Belmont first, and then moved to Lexington. Has it changed, particularly in the years that you've been here?
Lexington itself.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I'm seeing more of what Lexington is, given how much more I've become involved in things. I'm more involved now in things which are about town government. Not involved, but I'm looking at that stuff more and really seeing what goes on behind, seeing more of what happens behind the scenes of things and how much it really takes to keep anything going for any length of time. I would say I've probably gotten more involved politically in things. People who I know have gotten more involved politically in things. I don't know if that's a matter of local town politics, state politics, or national politics. But this has always been a place that has been about all three, from what I can understand. I would say since I've been here, the center, the community center, has opened up, which is a great place for people to go. I think is massively underutilized, but that's a good thing that has changed since I've been here. I would say I've met more people, and there are more people who I have an affinity with, and there are also more people I've met who we have some philosophical differences with each other. Mm-hmm. So is that a matter of the town changing? I don't know if it's that in my 10 years of having been here, but I think I've changed as a result of what I've experienced in the town for those 10 years, during those 10 years.
Yeah. Now, always a lot of talk, Reggie, about diversity. And, it's an interesting phenomenon. I don't know if you know this, but there are more African Americans in the town at the time of the Revolution than there are today.
I did hear that. I haven't read that, but I did hear that, yes.
And it's kind of weird.
Right.
I'm not quite sure why that's true.
Well, first I would ask a question, which is, were those African Americans free?
Well, there were a half a dozen free African American families and about an equal number of slaves.
Okay, so there was we're talking 24 families or something like that? Yeah. Something like that, or 18 families? Okay. And I know from what I understand, I was just with someone yesterday, and I have to look up these numbers, and I got two separate numbers, that there were approximately, someone said there was about 600 African Americans in this town. I don't know if that would include also Africans or people who are from South America who would be considered to also be black. But someone also said there were 200 families. So I'm not sure. I haven't checked the numbers. My feeling is there's not a lot.
Yeah.
That's my feeling. There's not a lot. I mean, I and my two boys are the only African Americans at our church, who attend. I don't see a lot of people who phenotypically resemble my demographic around town very much, particularly in my age group, which is that between that 45 and 55 years of age. I don't typically see that. Of course, there's a lot of young people who are coming in on the daily, 5 days a week because of Metco, and they're coming in.
Yeah.
But as far as town residents, that is my feeling too. Is that there's not a lot.
Yes, and strangely, I've been here since '49.
Wow.
It's not a recent phenomenon. What has happened, as you know well, is that the town is now about 25% Asian.
Yes.
Which is not true when I moved here.
Yes.
Obviously, it was Yankee, Italian, and Irish. But then there was an enormous growth in the Asian population. And, in say, Framingham, you get a large Hispanic population sort of clustering. And then Lawrence, you get a clustering of Vietnamese people and Southeast Asian.
Right. So it is diverse in one sense, just not as diverse as the United States is. But Lexington is a community that is expensive to live in.
Yes.
It's expensive to live in, and so that puts it outside of the possibility for I think most Americans. Most Americans, and unfortunately, that's just the way it is right now. Maybe some folks I know are working on ways of changing that, or at least challenging that fact. But I guess we'll wind up seeing if that actually winds up happening. But diversity for me is also not strictly about ethnic diversity. It's about diversity of thinking, diversity of approach. Diversity of how we how we do the American thing, and I'm not sure how much of that people feel is allowed here to be that diverse, because this place is so filled with American history. Yeah. Right. And history naturally carries with it a need to preserve. Yeah. Which is a need to conserve, which is a need to keep certain things as a mosquito in amber. Yeah. Right? And I'm saying I understand that impulse, and I think that part of that is very necessary. Very necessary. We can't continue to build a house unless we have a solid foundation, and the foundation can't continue to keep on shifting, or else the whole structure begins to shift. So we do have to have some fundamental and foundational things, which is going to lend us toward keeping certain things preserved that some of us might want to see changed.
Let's tell me more about that. I have a friend who teaches Professor Baruch in New York, and he's wonderful, something of an iconoclast. And he goes to faculty meetings, and he says, following up on what you were just saying, he says, we think we're so diverse, right? Because we have an African-American professor, and we have an Italian professor, and we have an Indian American, and so on. Yeah, we're not diverse. We just may look differently, but we're all the same people. We think all the same way.
Yes.
And that's what you were saying.
That's what I'm saying. Yes. I was asked once to be on a panel for a university that I had attended, getting my master's degree, and they wanted me to be on the panel to talk about how do we make things more diverse. And the first thing I said was, well, we need people who think differently, not just people who look differently, because that is what it needs. And we tend to not be as tolerant of different ways of thinking many times as we are with different ways of how people look.
Now, can you be a little more specific? What would constitute diversity of thinking in Lexington as Lexington is now?
Well, that's a good question. I would say, if I'm thinking about, again, I've only been here 10 years, and you've been here since 1949. So when it comes down maybe to that, I would say let's look at some of the thinking we have around, let's go even into the schools, some of the thinking that we have around suspension rates of African-American boys, let's just say. Part of what I think is going on with that is a traditional way of thinking about African-American boys, troublemakers. They're coming from outside of our neighborhood into this place. If there was a different way of looking at African-American boys, let's say there were more African-American teachers who came through an African-American culture, perhaps the move toward punishment of those boys would be greeted with another kind of cultural understanding that would better help them facilitate how to make connections into this culture that they have to come to every morning, which is the culture of Lexington, right? And so there's not much going on. There is some, I will say that, going on of saying this needs to be addressed. We need to figure out how to culturally think, shift the ways we think to deal with how these kids think so we can better educate them and facilitate them into our community. So that's one thing I would say is amongst the education.
So we can better understand.
Absolutely. But realistically, these kids are going to be coming, if they continue to go through the METCO program, they're going to be in this school, some of them for 10 years.
Yeah.
And so that's a sort of way of thinking that I would think is all the way from the elementary level clear up to the high school level, right?
Now, that's kind of discouraging, Reggie, because we've only had METCO since the mid-'60s. You'd think we might have caught on by now.
Well, certain things. Yeah, I think there are certain things which are working. But as we also know with anything, democracy itself is a process that is always having to self-correct, right? Yeah. And so anything that we've been doing since the 1960s, we can't think that we've done it, it's over, that's it, let's move on. It's like, no, we've initiated it. We've got it rolling. Now, as this car sort of goes down the street, let's see what we need to tweak in order to make sure that it stays on the road. And so that's what I'm hoping is we're doing. And I see this ebb and flow going back and forth. It's just you never know which part of our way of thinking, our more conservative part match against our more liberal part, however we want to say those things. Which one of those is, can those things talk to each other and come to truth instead of talking at each other and then determining no punishment? No punishment. They don't need this, they need that. So I would like to see how that actually plays itself out in education. That's one of the things that I'm seeing as far as this, as far as what I'm looking at, as far as a different way of thinking that I think could affect Lexington.
Politically, is there... You concerned by the lack of diversity in town?
I am. I mean, I didn't really, I looked around and saw like, wow, there's hardly any people of color who are in any town government, And I'm just really getting interested in
Good. You're going to run for town meeting?
No, I won't. I would say not now. I don't feel I know enough right now to run for town meeting. And also, I've witnessed enough of the slings and arrows that seem to get tossed at people who cast their hat into the fray. But possibly, someone has asked me that question before, and I'd want to just sit back and learn more and see what's really going on with the town. But yes, that getting back to your idea about the lack of diversity, that is a bit disturbing. I don't know if it's a matter of the majority population, also white population, won't vote for someone who is of a different ethnicity, or if it's just that those folks don't run.
I didn't see too many Trump signs around town.
From what I understand, there were 3,000 people in Lexington who voted for Trump, of which they had the right to. But I didn't see much of that either. Certainly I saw much more going toward New Hampshire than I saw here.
It's the flip side of the way it was when I was here. Mm-hmm. When I first came, nice people weren't Democrats, and so there was no Democratic Party, and nobody voted in Democratic primaries.
Wow.
There was about a third of the town voted Democratic in state and national elections, but they were really hidden.
They didn't show themselves in town politics?
Sure didn't. It was not appropriate.
Was it much more a Republican sort of stronghold?
Oh yeah, heavy 2-1. It was so. I ran for state rep in 1952 as an avowed Democrat, a Yankee Democrat, which was really weird. And Jolly Ferguson was one of the two reps from the district. He was town moderator. And the night before the election, Reggie, there was some kind of thing at Cary Hall, and he was there. And I went up to him and did the good campaign stuff, and reached out my hand, and he totally ignored me.
Oh.
And I realized that the chief of police, John Rycroft, was standing right behind him. Mm-hmm. And when Rycroft moved away, Charlie came rushing up to me and was very warm and very gracious. But he wasn't going to
be that
let
way
the police chief see him being gracious to a Democrat.
Oh.
That was the way the town was.
Wow.
And now it's just really the other way around. I mean, I would hate to be a Trump supporter in this town.
Well, one would think you'd be pretty lonely.
Exactly.
In many cases.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Something else. You said you were. You met Katie when you were in Cambridge.
Yes.
Doing you said a
poetry reading. Yeah, it was something called the Cambridge Poetry Awards, and I had been invited in along with 3 or 4 other people.
From Chicago?
No. We were from 2 of us were from Chicago. Another person was from Cleveland. One other person was from Washington, D.C. And so they invited the 4 of us in.
Who did?
This was Jeff Robinson is his name. He is a musician, and also I think he still works with the Cambridge Multicultural Arts Center.
Oh, I know that place.
Yeah, I think he still works with them. Oh, you were? Oh, great, great.
So that's where you were?
No. We were. He works for them now. At the time, he was running something out of a place called the Lizard Lounge, which is in Cambridge. Well, he still does that, but this was all around Cambridge. They were having different festival type things around poetry. That was with the Cambridge Center for Adult Education, and those few spots around. And they had a culminating performance that was at the Longfellow House. So that's where
they're in Radcliffe.
Yeah, exactly, right there.
And how did this group come together, and how did you happen to be?
Oh, I don't know. I was in Chicago at the time. What happened is I had come here. To Massachusetts, because some other friends of mine had invited me to do a performance. I had won something called the had I won it at the time? What it was called the National individual national poetry slam champion title, and so they wanted me to come in and do sort of a tour around Massachusetts. But before that, I had come in the year before, met some people, came down to a place, shook a few hands. When I won this, I was invited to come back and be part of a group of poets who were moving through Massachusetts in various places. And so they called me and invited me, put me on a plane, I came here. That's pretty much it.
So I know you're a Renaissance man, and I know you do sermons and music and poetry. What do you, if I ran into you on the street and said, Reggie, what are you professionally? Well,
what I normally tell people is I'm a literary performer and educator. And what that means for me is that I take literature, whether it is written or spoken or sang, and I try to lift it to a performative space. I also teach as well. I do a lot of stuff in colleges. I'm going to be teaching for Clark University, this Clark and Leslie, this October, this fall, and I teach for Emerson during the summer. So I teach intersections between poetry, literature, and also music and performance. I have a group called Shakespeare to Hip Hop, in which we take some of the works of William Shakespeare and also historical things about William Shakespeare, and we use American music in order to show why Shakespeare should be important to Americans. So we use funk, hip hop, blues, jazz, country, pop as ways of contextualizing and vehicles to promote the works of William Shakespeare, who, by the way, his birthday was yesterday, April 23rd.
Yeah.
From what we understand, there's so much about the man that we don't really know. But from what we understand, it's generally understood that he was born April 23, 1564.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. I didn't know about that involvement interest of yours.
Oh yeah.
There's an organization in Cambridge which I'm involved, called the Old Cambridge Shakespeare Association.
Really?
Goes back 135 years. You know, when a lot of these were springing up around
sort of Shakespeare societies, is that what you mean? Or?
And it was in Old Cambridge, which is the area around the square. And we get together every month and read a Shakespeare play.
Oh, yeah?
And I always get neat parts like Second Murderer. I don't know.
There's quite a few of those. It's quite a few of those. So you must be working a lot with this.
Right. Well, typecasting. It is,
Well, maybe you play that role well, Dad. Maybe that's what it is.
So most of us, Reggie, we set the alarm clock and we get up and we go to the office at 9 and we come home in the afternoon. What's your life like? You're doing this teaching and you're doing performances around.
Life is always involved in doing something that has to do with either literature or performance. Whether I am writing lyrics for someone, composing school songs for people, spackling whatever cracks I might have in any of the various performances that I have to do, whether I'm scheduling rehearsals or writing lesson plans or conversing with schools about the educational needs of their students and how I might best be able to come in for a 3-week residency and fulfill that. It's constantly something going on. There's not really a day that I really rest. The weekends can sometimes be even worse. Because that's the day when I get to really drill down on stuff, because most of the things I have to do on the weekend happen at night. So the days are usually fairly free, so I can really drill down. So it sometimes my wife has to remind me to eat. Yeah, she has to remind me to eat, or I'll say, man, I got a headache. She's like, did you eat? Did you drink any water? Like, oh yeah. So it's constantly something, and the summertime is crazy. Summertime gets crazy as well. So I'll be teaching for 3 places during the summer: Emerson, I'll also be at a place called Grub Street, which is downtown. I'll teach there for 3 weeks. 2 weeks, Emerson for 5. No, Grub Street for 3 weeks, Emerson for 5 weeks, so they're overlap.
What's Grub Street?
Grub Street is an independent writers center. It is one of the largest, I think, in the United States, and certainly one of the most active in Boston. And it takes individuals who want to write and trains them on how to do so. And they're celebrating 20 years this year. Yay. And I've taught their young people in something called the YAWP program, Young Adult Writers Program. We get the YAWP part from Walt Whitman's, one of his poems.
Yeah,
you know,
sure.
I sound my barbaric yawp across the world's rooftops.
Yeah.
And teaching young people how if you're going to rant, and young people are going to rant,
Yeah.
then there is an articulate way to rant, and we
Yeah.
want to teach them how to do that. But hopefully also give them some literary skills in the meantime. So I work with that. We have a wonderful program where we pay young people to write. The summer fellowship is we give them money. We bring them in for 3 weeks. We train them on intersections between both poetry and nonfiction, but also fiction. And if they make the cut, we give them dough. We actually pay them to be there. So it's a paid fellowship for them. And the third place I teach with this summer will be with the Massachusetts Poetry Festival. They have a professional development weeks that I teach teachers how to best implement literature in the classrooms. So all of that's happening within 5 weeks in the summer.
How to build literature into their
curriculums. I give them the various curricula. I give them ideas for what to do with creative writing and the work they have to teach, which is some of the stuff they have to teach, poetry and what to do, but also how to link my ideas and the ideas I'm giving them with Massachusetts frameworks, with the curriculum of what the Massachusetts frameworks have to have. So that tends to work. And I love doing that work because I get teachers of all different grades who come in. It's mostly pitched, most of my pitching is toward middle school and high school. But any teacher can come in, and they'll just have to adjust whatever it is that they get. And I've been able to give many of them ideas of what to do, to sort of pitch it to their own students and how it might match up with Massachusetts mass frameworks.
What happened to the good great New England poets, Lowell and Whittier and Longfellow?
They died.
Yeah, why?
They died.
Well, I know they died.
Okay. You mean what happened to them? Why don't we read them anymore?
Yeah, because that's right. I was brought up with Emerson and Whittier and
yes. I mean, Emerson and Thoreau were for me. Well, Emerson, I prefer him as an essayist.
Yeah.
Over, he's a bit more didactic in his poetry than I prefer. I think it was another New England poet, Denise Levertov, who said, "It's really difficult to make a good poem out of ought to."
Okay.
And Emerson has a lot of ought to going on as far as his poetry, but being a good essayist, he was second to none. And whosoever should be a man should be a nonconformist, and all the things that he has to say, and some of the things I could only imagine. Well, I've read, but I could just imagine how he must have sounded coming from the pulpit, for that time when he was a Unitarian minister, and Thoreau, of course. For me, has been an inspiration ever since I first heard his name mentioned by both writings of King and Gandhi. I even wrote a couple of sort of almost rap type things about Emerson and Thoreau because I wanted kids who listen more to more modern music to really understand what these guys were about, what the transcendentalist way of thinking was about.
And so you put that into rap?
What I took to be the thrust of what they were saying and what they're trying to get across and what it means for us in modern day. I could do one for you if you want.
Yeah.
Okay. Henry Thoreau told civilization, "Yo, I gotta go. I need a vacation." So he went out to Walden where he got this revelation. Whoa. So many of us live lives of quiet desperation. Lo and behold, another transcendentalist quotation seems to capture the essence of a modern vexation. It's as if Thoreau knew that in the future you and I would have to act in radical ways to mitigate the sad fact that Because we've got to slave to keep our bills paid, sometimes it seems our minds are kind of ripe to get played by the vultures in our culture who only hope to withhold us from anything any deeper than work while we scold you, buy what we told you, pay what you owe, and we'll ensure you've got a debt you'll never get over. Treating human beings as if we're merely skin machines where the cash is, some sick profiteers, demographics, puppets who are made of plastic, molded and mastered, stretched thin as thread till we're bled dead into our caskets. Oh, we try to contrast it by coming all sarcastic, but we hate this situation, and the situation is so drastic that many of us will huff and puff and snort all kinds of stuff to get blasted, hoping to deaden the pain, but we find that just never lasts. And sometimes it makes the masses act more passive, which keeps our minds inactive to the plans of the fascists, who hope to keep you and I separated into races and genders and classes because, well, that's how you maintain the status quo status as is. But don't let them head fake you, shake and bake and back break you down to the ground, come around, clown and undertake you. You got to fight back. And my advice is, use whatever poetry is trapped inside of you as your weapon. Do you dig? So that for me is more of a somewhere between jazz and rap.
Yeah.
You know, but it's also sort of like a monologue as well. An introduction of young people to the ideas of finding your own center, being suspicious of what's being told to you. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean dismissive, you know, but it does mean being suspicious. I was actively asked to leave a school once, not in Massachusetts, but I was giving a speech, and I said to young people that you should be extraordinarily suspicious. Do not put 100% of your trust into any organization or individual who claims to act in your best interest, but never asks your opinion.
Yeah.
And one school, which shall remain nameless, said, "Thank you, Mr. Gibson. Here's your check." And
go home.
Yes, you know, get out of here. And so that harks back to, I was mentioning earlier, the Emersonian quote. You know, whosoever shall be a man, and we'll expand that to whoever will be a free-thinking human being, must to some degree become a nonconformist. Not to just accept what's been told to you, but to say, okay, well, let me see how much that comports and conforms to truth, both observable, both researched, and whether or not it actually makes ethical and moral sense for me to approach this action. And if someone's asking you to do something that does not sound true, you've studied and it doesn't seem true, it seems like a falsehood, and it's asking you to do something that you know goes against what you understand to be your ethical and moral center, it's time for you to take a break from that and not go in that direction. And that's my thought about what I hope I try to do is to try to communicate not only factual truth. I'm not a person who believes I should have my own facts, but factual truth along with emotional and historical truth as far as how the individual feels about it. Feels is right in the heart.
Do you think that we've got at the moment sort of a guppy society where, you know, you sort of taking the stuff that, huh?
Yes, I think information which passes easily for knowledge nowadays, particularly if an institution or individual can say it loudly enough, it'll pass for knowledge. I think we too easily consume that information as truth, when it is the responsibility of everyone in a democracy, if you want it to be viable and continue to work, to go and investigate and see if what someone's actually said to you has any kind of verisimilitude. Mm. And but I think it's also that we're overwhelmed with places to get information from, mm-hmm. and it becomes increasingly more difficult, I think, for people to wade through it. And plus, you know, much of our media is entertainment, and entertainment asks that you don't think. Mm-hmm. Thinking in a democracy is a very democracy or a constitutional republic, as I'm sure some of people might say. It's a difficult thing to constantly keep the mind fortified against untruths. And I can see that, and also to meet the responsibilities therein, which means one must go and seek it, and seek facts it's a difficult thing to do, to continue to do that. And so some of us, we just turn that part of ourselves off, and as you said, we guppy up.
Yeah.
we just get fed from another place, and next thing you know, we lose critical thinking.
Kennedy said we too many times we indulge in the expression of an opinion without the discomfort of thought.
Yes, absolutely.
So you're doing this teaching, and you're helping teachers put these kinds of thoughts into a framework,
yes.
which the kids of today will respond to.
Hopefully.
And how much? And then you do performances, and is that poetry mostly? Or?
I would say it would go in that direction. Yeah, sometimes when I'm teaching students, I call, depending upon how young they are, when they hear poetry, they run away from it. It's like, oh my God, a poem is supposed to be this. So I call it sometimes wordplay with a purpose. But yes, it would be forms of verse, forms of free verse, forms of sometimes fixed form poetry. Shakespearean sonnets are fixed form. And I would do that, but I might also do soliloquies, parts of soliloquies or speeches, like from Henry V.
Yeah.
I have truncated version.
Yeah,
exactly. And I have truncated versions of that, which sort of take out some of the distinct Englishisms that might not be necessary for us to understand really what's going on, and talk about issues of manhood, and whether Henry V was a good leader, and how do we look at that. I do that with Shakespeare, but I also go back. I work I work a lot with the classics as well. The Iliad is a book that I always go back to, and the Odyssey as well. I go back to that. It depends upon the population that I'm addressing. I wrote a lecture when I was in my master's program. It was called "The Iliad as Gangster Rap."
Oh.
And it was using Achilles and I do this sometimes for schools, is using Achilles as a sort of modern day gangster rapper. To say what?
Really?
Yeah. He's called MC Kill.
Not quite sure how that works.
Well, I can give you 2 minutes on it. When you read the Iliad, right?
Yeah.
Well, let's look at how it begins, right? Man and Peleadeo Achilleos, right? So you get that wonderful, dactylic hexametric pulse, and it's something that the culture loves. So it's rhythmic. So there's a rhythm and there's a poetry that happens there. Okay, so there's clearly a connection between that and hip hop. The other thing about it is that there's a bard who's saying it. So there's a storyteller who's speaking in the rhythms of the culture,
right,
which is what you get in rap, which I like to call it rhythmic American poetry, RAP. The thing that we get from the first thing of the Iliad, right? The first word in the Iliad is manen, which comes from the Greek word manes, which means wrath or anger or rage, right? In English it says, speak to us, speaking to the muse in the invocation, speak to us of the rage of Achilles, Peleus' son,
okay,
right? And so my thought is, and then let's go into the story just a second. Achilles, why is he angry? Well, the reason he's angry is because he has not had the chance to sexually violate a captive woman. She's been taken away from him by a person with more authority, and he's actually angry about this, right? And so we have misogyny and anger right there in the very beginning of the longest extant, the extant text, the Greek extant text that we have, one of the first epics that we have as far as in its completion. We get anger and we get misogyny right at the beginning. Well, when you listen to a lot of gangster rap, what are you hearing?
Yeah.
You're hearing anger and you're hearing misogyny. Now, my thought is that if instead of the bard invoking the goddess to give the bard himself the words to speak of Achilles, what if Achilles spoke of his own anger, right, and his own feelings, and he came out with talking about his own rage? And of course, if you know the Iliad, you know that every time someone kills someone on the battlefield, they give this long list of their accomplishments and who they are. They give their pedigree. They're bragging, essentially about how tough and how much swagger they have. Well, that's what happens a lot in gangster rap. There's a lot of bragging about how tough they are and how they can take out anybody. Well, it's the same thing the Greeks do. And of course, talk about violence. Homer never kills anybody without giving you an excruciating amount of detail as to how that individual died, right? And so my thought is Achilles, who's praised for his prowess, right? And in prowess in battle, especially with the Greeks, you get the geros, which is one of the things that you get for war, physical things. Your geros might be a chariot, shielding, or the ultimate thing you get is a woman. Mm-hmm. That's what's appointed to you from your boys. Mm-hmm. And so the small thing of the Iliad is gangster rap is, what if I was to take men and naede thea peleadeo Achilleos and make that into a hook? Men and naede thea Achilleos, which means speak, goddess of the anger of Achilles, but have Achilles speak of his anger and his prowess in battle. Mm-hmm. How would it sound? Well, Achilles might say, everybody knows I'm the greatest warrior in Greece, and when I kill a man with skill and ease. I don't think about it or waste a lick of time. To everything a purpose, and making war is mine. I don't care for some cowardly way of taking a man out from some point far away. It takes steel nerves and a pair of brass you-know-whats to step into a man and then stab him in the guts. And then, and he goes on, and he talks about how he does this. So if Achilles talked about it instead of the bard talking about it, in the rhythms of his culture, given the values of his culture, he'd be very synonymous to a gangster rapper.
It reminds me of Faulkner's famous quote, Reggie. Mm-hmm. The past isn't dead, it's not even past.
It's a very great quote. It's still with us. We're still part of it. I mean, that has contextualized a lot of what's with males in Western culture, when we look at that, That's why I study the epics, and Shakespeare and also, because this is an encyclopedia of Western culture, for us to understand psychologically how we got this way, particularly what it means to be man, how manhood has changed, how it's not in certain things. What does swagger mean to the ancient Greeks? Well, what did it mean in Shakespeare's day? What does it mean nowadays? What did it mean to John Wayne versus
Adam Clayton Powell?
Yeah,
Chuck Stone wrote a book about the swagger, I think.
Mm-hmm. Of Adam Clayton Powell?
About Powell.
Mm-hmm.
Was it Powell?
Mm-hmm.
Biography.
Oh, yeah. I'll check that out.
Yeah. Well, and how did you get into this? This is a very unusual kind of line of work.
Well, if I was to I've done some slight forensics on it. My great-grandfather, who I knew, he was a railway worker, and he was illiterate. So he had to create stories and rhymes and songs as mnemonic devices so he could remember things. And we used to say that, when great-grandpa, if he could remember a story completely without missing a step, the story was probably not completely true.
Yeah.
It was when he started trying to smack his forehead and bumble through it, he was really trying to remember, then it probably had some truth to it. But when it came down to that, if he could remember it, it was like, no, that's something he practiced because he needed to remember something. And so I trace that sort of back to him. And he would sing these railroad songs that he would make up because he was the caller, as he's known, which is the person who sings the songs so that people can swing the hammer in rhythm. And so one of his songs, right, so that was his job.
Yeah.
And so he would sing one song I remember, I am working now, all day long, Lord, here comes the sun, traveling tracks of sky, oh, Lord, and as I got older, my grandmother would sing a song. She was very Christian, and those songs kind of went together. They kind of melded like that. My brother and I, we still talk about that moment when her spiritual love song to God and his secular work song sort of melded, and it seemed to be seamless for a moment, even when it seemed that they couldn't get along. And for us, we still talk about whatever it was that was in that blending. My brother is now a grandfather. And I think for myself, I'm trying to journey back to whatever that sound was. Right?
Okay.
I think for me, I'm trying to get back to what that space was. When I examined my grandfather's song, who if you told him he was doing poetry, he probably would say no, he was just singing what was in his heart. And I look at what he was singing about, he was making a metaphor. Here comes the sun traveling up tracts of sky. But what he was doing was taking an image from his daily work and superimposing that, right, with something that he saw every day. So he saw this train every day. He saw the sun every day. And the train becomes the sun, and the sky becomes the tracks. And it was a natural blending of metaphor that happened where he saw them as the same thing in the song. And because of him, I think I trace it back to that. The second influence was my Uncle Larry, who gave me, and I didn't bring it with me today. I didn't think to bring it. He gave me a dictionary for my 7th birthday. And my Uncle Larry was a drug abuser. I didn't know that at the time. Who felt, when I look back on his life, that he had nothing really to offer. And when he gave me this dictionary, he says, you know, you're pretty good with those words. I got no use for this. You take this. And I've had that book with me for approximately 43 years. I take it to almost every school I go to. Should have brought it today, like I said. And I started reading that book about a year and a half later. And it was about 300 pages. And I started just reading the dictionary. And even though at the time I didn't think of it as a gift, I'm like, well, thanks, Unc, for a book. You know, it has no batteries, no lights. It doesn't make noise. You know, I'm 7 years old. Later on, I really found how much of a gift that he was giving me. And maybe my uncle saw something, certainly, that I didn't really see, you know, at the time. So if I trace it going back, I would say those are two very formative experiences that I think brought me into what I do.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, I'm awfully grateful to you for taking this time. And
I'm glad to be asked.
And I said when we started that Reggie was one of the jewels, one of the treasures in our town, and certainly this hour has shown that to be true.
Well, thank you, sir.
So thanks so much.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Thank you.